There is belief, and then there is skepticism. And between the two lies a vast territory of questions and the unknown. But what if reality is far more complex than we've been willing to perceive? And what if the stories we dismissed as mere myth and legend hold the keys to understanding consciousness? From ghostly encounters to lights in the sky, humanity has always sensed there was something more out there. Some call it the paranormal, and others call it the divine. Some look to the stars for answers, while others search within. Philosophy asks why, theology asks who, science asks how, and we ask ourselves, what if? We stand at a meeting point, a place where the fabric between realities is thinner than you might think. This is Crossroads of the Veil. In the silence between stars, a whisper travels, and the echoes of a world long forgotten reach out from beyond the void. Time begins to fracture here, and the past and future are entwined. And if you listen closely, every crackle is a story untold. And in this endless night, we search for the meaning beyond the noise. We find ourselves standing at an intersection of history and the unexplained. This is a place where the clean, accepted timeline begins to blur and fray at the edges. It's a place where the little details begin to whisper of a much stranger, more complicated reality than we are usually prepared to accept. Our story is not one of grand battles or famous political speeches, but of quiet moments that may have changed the world more than any headline. This story begins within the quiet confines of a single New York City apartment during the winter of 1918. It is a story that poses a question so deeply unsettling it can shake the foundations of what we believe to be real. Can a secret ritual, an act of pure focused will, echo through the corridors of time and fundamentally reshape the landscape of the future? And in asking that question, it forces us to confront a possibility that is as chilling as it is profound. Can a door, once it has been opened, ever truly be closed again? We are not speaking of a physical door made of wood and iron. We are speaking of a gateway, a tear in the veil that separates our perceived reality from somewhere or something else. It is a veil woven from our shared understanding of the world, our science, our senses, and our sanity. What happens when such a door is unsealed, even for a moment? What kind of intelligence, what form of consciousness might slip through in those first fleeting moments of opportunity? Imagine them, drawn to the light of our world, like moths to a flickering flame in an endless darkness. Are they curious? Are they hungry? Or are they something so utterly different that our concepts of motive simply do not apply? More importantly, what if the act of opening that door is irreversible? Once a piece of knowledge is gained, it cannot be truly unlearned. It can be suppressed, ignored, or denied, but it still exists. Once a new possibility is introduced into the world, it can never be fully contained again. You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. You cannot unring a bell. The act itself, the simple prying open of that door, creates a permanent change, a new and previously unknown pathway in the vast, interconnected landscape of human thought. The story then is not just about what might have come through in that one specific moment. The more pressing question is what has been trickling through that unclosed door ever since, a slow but steady stream of influence that has seeped into our culture and our understanding of the universe. To understand the origin, we must journey back through the crackling static of a century, tuning our minds to a frequency long since gone silent. We must travel to a world that was being consumed by fire, a civilization tearing itself apart in the final days of the war to end all wars. The year is 1918. The Great War, what we would later call World War I, is in its death throes. For 4 long years, it has churned across the fields of Europe, a relentless machine of death and destruction. The old world of kings and empires is dying with it. In the trenches of the Western Front, millions of young men have been sacrificed to the gods of industry and nationalism. It is a world of machine guns, poison gas, and artillery. that can erase a forest in an afternoon. The world is a crucible of chaos, fear, and death. But our destination is not the barbed wire and shell craters of the Western Front. Our journey takes us to a room in New York City, a world seemingly away from the carnage. It is a place that has been made sacred, anointed by the sweet scent of incense and the immense weight of human intention. It is within this meeting point of chaos and private ambition that our story truly takes place. Here, in the heart of one of the world's most modern cities, a man named Aleister Crowley, a figure who seems more myth than man, more legend than reality, performed a ritual that he believed was just as important as any battle being fought in Europe. To the public, he was the wickedest man in the world, a label the tabloid newspapers of his day gave him. And it was a title he wore with theatrical flair, understanding that notoriety was its own form of power, a symbol of everything they feared: rebellion, intellectual freedom, and the rejection of conventional morality. But behind that carefully constructed public mask, the reality of the man was far more complex. He was a Cambridge-educated intellectual, a man of letters who could debate philosophy and classics with the best of his generation. He was a published poet of considerable skill, his work praised by some of the finest literary minds of his time. He was a world-class mountaineer, a pioneer who had faced death on the unconquered slopes of K2 and other Himalayan giants, pushing the limits of human endurance. And most importantly for our story, he was a master of an ancient and demanding art of magic. While the city outside his apartment surrendered to the forces of war and pandemic, Crowley was engaged in an intensely personal act of focused will. He was seeking to control the one thing he believed he could: his own consciousness. He believed that by mastering the inner world, he could influence the outer one. His experiment was not one of beakers and burners. It was what he termed a working, a grand and complex magical ritual. And it had a single audacious goal: to deliberately and carefully pierce the veil of reality. He intended to create a controlled tear in the very fabric of the known world and establish direct contact with whatever intelligences might exist on the other side. The Amalantrah Working, as this series of rituals would come to be known, was a direct counter-narrative to the overwhelming chaos of its time. Crowley's entire system of philosophy and religion, which he called Thelema, is founded on a single radical assertion of individual will and purpose. Its most famous axiom is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Magic, he defined it with scientific precision: the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. It was a psychological and spiritual technology for achieving one's true purpose. In a world where individual will seemed utterly meaningless, Crowley's ritual was a microcosm of absolute control. It was a focused imposition of order and intent upon the universe. He was not waiting for fate to deal him a hand. He was actively trying to engineer a new one. The experiment resulted in something tangible, something that has outlived the man and the era in which it was created. It resulted in a portrait, a simple stark ink drawing that has become a kind of paranormal Rosetta Stone. It is a key that seems to unlock a mystery far deeper than Crowley himself could have ever imagined. It contains a mystery that has deepened with time, growing in significance with every passing decade. The drawing shows a being. It has a large bald head, an overdeveloped cranium that tapers down to a small vestigial jaw and chin. It has a mere slit for a mouth, and its eyes are large, shaped like almonds, and they seem to hold the emptiness of space within them. It is a face that, at the time it was drawn in 1919, was unknown to the world. And yet, it is a face that today is instantly familiar. This is the story of the Amalantrah Working, and it is the story of the being whose face was captured in that drawing, the entity known only as Lam. Born Edward Alexander Crowley in 1875, his life was a constant war against the world he was born into, a rebellion that would set the stage for his audacious attempt to contact another. He was the son of a wealthy family. His parents were devout members of the Plymouth Brethren, a particularly strict and exclusive sect of evangelical Christianity. His childhood was saturated with biblical scripture and prayer meetings, the constant weight of sin and judgment of his father, who was a lay preacher. The young Crowley was forced to live and breathe a faith that he found to be deeply hypocritical and spiritually repressive. This was not a passing adolescent rebellion. It was a profound intellectual and spiritual rejection that would define the rest of his life. He adopted the name Aleister upon entering Cambridge, a symbolic shedding of his past. There he immersed himself in the pursuits that would shape him: poetry, mountaineering, and the forbidden world of modern occultism. His true genius lay in his systematic and almost scientific approach to the ancient art of magic. In 1898, at the age of 23, he was initiated into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the most influential magical society of its time. This was the secret heart of the Victorian occult revival. The Golden Dawn was a highly structured, esoteric school, a magical university of sorts, that taught a complex and syncretic system of Hermetic Kabbalah, astrology, tarot, and ceremonial magic to the intellectual and artistic elite. Here Crowley received a world-class education in the Western esoteric tradition. He mastered its complex symbolic language, its intricate ritual techniques, and its profound philosophical underpinnings. But true to his nature, he didn't just learn the system. He immediately sought to perfect it and ultimately to build his own upon its foundations. By 1918, Crowley was 43 years old and living in self-imposed exile in New York City. Though cut off from his inheritance and financially destitute, he was a man of contradictions. He edited pro-German journals as freelance intelligence work for the British, yet was a celebrated figure in Greenwich Village's bohemian counterculture. There he exhibited paintings, took on magical students, and waged spiritual warfare against consensus reality. During this period, his life revolved around artistic creation, magical experimentation, and philosophical development, all focused on establishing Thelema as the blueprint for humanity's coming age. But no matter how powerful he was, he could not perform this kind of operation alone. He needed a seer, a receiver for the transmission he hoped to initiate. The second crucial figure is a woman named Roddy Minor. She has been relegated to the status of a mere footnote in this story, dismissed as just another of Crowley's mistresses or scarlet women. This underestimates her importance to the working. Born in Georgia in 1884, Roddy Minor was an artist's model, a striking woman who moved in the same bohemian circles as Crowley. But she was also, according to Crowley's own accounts, a woman of formidable intellect and scientific training. He notes that she had worked in a pathology laboratory and as a managing chemist for a perfumery firm. This background grounded her firmly in the world of empirical science. Crowley approached his magic with what he proudly termed the method of science. He kept detailed diaries of every ritual, every result, seeking verifiable, repeatable outcomes. A fundamental principle of any scientific experiment is the control of variables to prevent confirmation bias, or the tendency to see what you expect to see. In Roddy Minor, Crowley found the perfect control. Crucially, she had no prior occult training. He saw her mind as a blank slate, free from complex magical hierarchies. Her visions would be pure, untainted by expectation or prior esoteric knowledge. This ensured that any being she described would be an objective phenomenon, not a subconscious recall from a book. She was an objective instrument, not a co-conspirator. Her scientific background was her primary qualification, transforming their dynamic to a modern lead investigator and his sensitive detection apparatus. He gave her a magical name, a title with deep and specific Kabbalistic significance. He named her the Camel. The Amalantrah Working holds significant power within Hermetic Kabbalah. This mystical system maps reality onto the Tree of Life, a glyph with 10 spheres or states of being connected by 22 paths, each corresponding to a Hebrew letter. The Hebrew letter Gimel, meaning camel, links divine consciousness to the human consciousness soul. The camel is the ship of the desert. It is the only creature capable of carrying a precious cargo across the vast wasteland of the abyss, the great void of non-being and dissolution that separates the phenomenal, created world from the divine reality. In selecting this name, Crowley was explicitly and precisely defining Roddy Minor's role. She was to be the vessel. She was to be the living ship that would traverse the great spiritual void and carry a message back from the other side. The Amalantrah Working, conducted in that New York apartment from January to March of 1918. But it was not some tabloid fantasy. It was a sophisticated spiritual operation. It employed 3 distinct and powerful magical technologies, each one designed to systematically break down the barriers of perception, and construct a bridge to another world. The entire process was documented in Crowley's magical diary Liber 729. The atmosphere within the ritual space was transformed. The air was otherworldly with the scent of incense. These were resins and woods that had been used in sacred rituals for thousands of years, from the temples of ancient Egypt to the cathedrals of Rome. The burning of incense is a practice found in religious and mystical rituals worldwide for a very good reason. Modern science has begun to validate its ancient psychoactive properties. The smoke itself is a physical manifestation of the boundary between the material and the immaterial, a solid substance transforming into an invisible gas. Resins like frankincense have been shown to contain compounds that activate specific channels in the brain, alleviating anxiety and producing powerful antidepressant-like effects. The incense served to alter the participant's state of mind while simultaneously creating a powerful sensory anchor, blurring the lines between the seen and the unseen world. Into this atmosphere, invocations were introduced. The low resonant chanted tones, ancient words of power were made to vibrate in the air and in the very bodies of the participants. The use of sound is another ancient technology, a form of resonance designed to attune the consciousness to a different frequency. The visual interface for the operation was the ancient divinatory technique of scrying. It involves the seer gazing intently into a reflective surface. This could be a crystal ball, a black mirror, a bowl of water, or even a pool of ink. The goal is to stare until the ordinary world dissolves and the inner eye opens to other realities. This is a form of controlled sensory deprivation. By staring at a fixed point, the practitioner drastically reduces the amount of sensory input reaching the brain. The brain, starved of new information, begins to fill the void, pulling from the depths of the subconscious. This process is known as the Ganzfeld effect. It is known to induce hallucinatory experiences and altered states of consciousness. It is believed to make the seer receptive to images and intelligences from outside their own mind. Roddy Miner would settle her mind, detaching from the world, her consciousness becoming a blank slate upon which a new reality could be written. To enhance and accelerate this process, these sessions were augmented by the use of psychoactive substances. Crowley, in his framework, viewed drugs not as a recreational indulgence, but as keys capable of unlocking otherwise inaccessible doors of perception. Each substance had a specific effect on consciousness that could be utilized for a magical goal. The dream-inducing and reality-softening properties of opium were employed to dissolve the boundaries of the ego and make the transition into the scrying state more profound. Finally, the entire operation was charged and energized through the techniques of sexual magic. Crowley considered the energy released to be the most powerful and potent source of raw psychic force available to a magician. He believed when this energy was directed by a trained will, it could be used to fuel the most profound and ambitious magical undertakings, providing the power to tear open the veil and stabilize the connection. This powerful combination formed the architecture of the Amalantrah Working. It was a multi-pronged assault on the fortress of reality. Roddy made contact, but the being who appeared was disarmingly familiar. She described an old wizard with a long gray beard, a classic archetype straight out of myth and folklore. But Crowley, for all his mysticism, was at his core a pragmatist and a skeptic. He devised a test rooted in the arcane and complex science of the Kabbalah. He posed a question to the wizard, a question that had long escaped occult scholars and historians. What was the correct spelling of the idol allegedly worshipped by the Knights Templar, the infamous Baphomet? The name has been spelled in dozens of different ways over the centuries, with no definitive consensus. The wizard provided a specific 8-letter spelling. Crowley wrote it down and applied an ancient system of mystical numerology, where each letter of the alphabet corresponds to a specific numerical value. It is a system for finding hidden layers of meaning and connection in words. He translated the letters of the name into their Hebrew equivalents and meticulously summed their values. The total was 729. In a moment of cosmic alignment, Crowley realized the staggering significance of this number. 729. It was the exact same numerical value as the wizard's own name, which he had given as Amalantrah. That alone was striking, but there was more. It was the number that Crowley himself, weeks earlier, had assigned to the very magical diary in which he was recording the working. He had designated it Liber 729. The number is also 9 cubed and 27 squared, numbers of immense significance in Kabbalistic and numerological systems. For Crowley, this was not a coincidence. This was a sign. It was proof of an intelligence operating on a level of symbolic and mathematical sophistication that transcended his and Roddy's own minds. It was a proof written in the universal language of numbers. The contact was genuine. The working had crossed a threshold, and the channel was open. The connection to Amalantrah was verified. The channel was stable and the communication was clear. Crowley had achieved his initial goal. But on the very first day of the working, January 14, 1918, the communication shifted dramatically and unexpectedly. The purpose of the entire ritual was about to be turned on its head. Something else appeared, something unexpected and profoundly strange. Roddy, gazing into the scrying mirror and asking Amalantrah for a message, received a new and startling vision. What appeared in her vision was something utterly new. It was an egg. Her description is chillingly specific and noticeably devoid of the usual mystical or poetic flair. It reads like a laboratory observation. She saw a symbol as ancient as time itself, a perfect and universal representation of the cosmos hatching from divine thought. The symbol was primordial. But the egg Roddy described was different. She described it as containing many, many tiny convolutions of some flesh-like substance which would form something. This is not the language of myth, it is the language of biology. It is as if she is peering through a microscope, not into a scrying glass. It was a vision that felt less like a miracle and more like a glimpse into a process of alien biology. Roddy described the egg as appearing as if it were in a picture frame, and surrounding this frame were symbolic representations of the 4 classical elements: earth, air, fire, and water. In Western esotericism, the 4 elements are the building blocks of all manifest reality. Their presence here was a clear and unambiguous statement. Whatever was inside the egg was destined for manifestation in the material world. And standing before this entire scene was a camel. The camel was Roddy's own magical name, the name that defined her function as the vessel capable of traversing the abyss. It was confirming that this vision was indeed the message she was meant to carry back from across the great void, from another reality. The focus of the working was no longer just about receiving arcane messages from an old spirit guide. The entire purpose and direction of the magical operation had pivoted in a single, startling moment. The wizard Amalantrah himself immediately reinforced the profound importance of this new symbol. At the very end of that first session, she had a final vision of the wizard putting his arm around her, a comforting paternal gesture. And then he stated simply and directly, "It's all in the egg." This was a profound and critical declaration. It signaled that the ultimate purpose of this great magical endeavor was not to be found in the continued wisdom of the wizard, but was contained within the cosmic vessel. The focus was wrenched away from Amalantrah and fixed upon what he had brought forth. The wizard was now secondary. His purpose had been fulfilled. He was no longer the teacher, he was merely the messenger. He had delivered his package. The egg became the centerpiece. A seed had been planted in the fertile ground of the ritual. And a seed once planted grows according to its own nature, with its own will. The question that hung in the air was no longer, what is the message, but what is going to hatch? The year is now 1919. The months-long ritual of the Amalantrah Working is complete. The scrying sessions have concluded. The channel has been closed, and the visions have ceased. The apartment is quiet again. But its influence on Aleister Crowley is far from over. The psychic residue of the working clings to him. The images, the words, have burned themselves into his consciousness. He is haunted by the face of a strange, large-eyed being that manifested in visions subsequent to the appearance of the egg. This was the face of the thing in the egg. He feels compelled to perform one final act of magic, an act of creation. This is the core thelemic principle of shaping reality according to one's focused intention, of manifesting one's true will. He must take the ethereal fleeting form that he witnessed through his seer and translate it onto the material one. He must make it real. He sets out to produce a portrait. He takes up pen and ink and with intense focus he creates a drawing that is both a historical document of a spiritual encounter and a powerful magical talisman in its own right. This is the critical moment where the fleeting vision is made concrete. It is captured, stabilized, and made permanent. The invisible is made visible, and in doing so is given a power and a foothold in our world that it did not possess before. A memory can fade, but a picture can be reproduced infinitely. What he does next is just as significant. In an arguably world-changing act, he publishes it. He places the portrait as the very first image the reader sees in his new book, The Voice of the Silence. This book is published as part of his prestigious journal, The Equinox, Volume 3, Number 1, also known as The Blue Equinox. This was his magnum opus of the period, a beautifully produced volume containing the holy books of his religion, Thelema, alongside complex essays on Kabbalah and magic. By placing this portrait at the very beginning, he was giving it a place of supreme importance. He is announcing it to the world, and beneath the portrait, he adds a subtitle that is both a cryptic explanation and a deeper mystery, The Way. The striking black and white portrait features a being with a large, hairless, egg-shaped head that dominates the frame. Its lower face narrows to a tiny, pointed chin and a slit mouth. Lacking visible ears or eyebrows, its smooth, pale skin is broken only by vast, black, lidless, almond-shaped eyes. They are not the eyes of a creature from Earth. They stare out from the page with a cold, unblinking, and profoundly alien intelligence. There is wisdom there, but it is not human. It is the image of something ancient. By publishing this image, Crowley has done more than simply documenting a personal spiritual experience. He has committed an act of magical transmission. He has unleashed a thought form, a seed of consciousness, into the fertile soil of the collective human mind. In modern terms, we would call what he did creating a meme, but in the more ancient language of occultism, he has created something far more potent, an egregore, an autonomous psychic entity, a non-physical being that is brought into existence through the focused will and belief of an individual or a group, and is then sustained and strengthened by the continued attention and belief of others. By drawing Lam and publishing that drawing, he invited the entire world, knowingly or not, to feed it with their attention, their curiosity, and their fear. He took a secret from a ritual and turned it into a seed, and planted it in the collective unconscious of humanity. In 1919, a world reeling sought new meaning amid shattered beliefs. The occult revival saw a surge of interest in spiritualism and magic, as traditional religion and science failed to explain recent horrors. Amidst the spiritual hunger, Aleister Crowley may have introduced something new. The question of Lam's existence is no longer confined to the four walls of that New York apartment. It is now posed to the world, and to us listening here a century later. Where have you seen it before? The answer is everywhere. It is a face that has become a permanent fixture in the dark corners of our modern world. It is the face that stares out from the covers of countless books and documentaries about alien abduction and UFO conspiracies. It is the face described by terrified witnesses from the alleged crash site at Roswell, New Mexico, to the lonely backroads of rural America, Brazil, and Australia. It is the face of the gray-skinned figures that stand at the foot of the bed in the dead of night, their purpose unknown and terrifying. It is, in short, the iconic face of a gray, the single most dominant and pervasive alien archetype of our time. Crowley's simple ink drawing is arguably the first known depiction of such a being resulting from a purported real-world encounter. It is a visual record that predates the cultural phenomenon of the gray alien by decades. This portrait was published a full generation before Betty and Barney Hill would describe their captors under hypnosis in 1961, their terrifying story becoming the foundational template for the thousands of abduction accounts that would follow. It was published almost 70 years before that same face would stare out from the cover of Whitley Strieber's best-selling and culture-defining book Communion in 1987, the book that burned this specific image of the alien into the minds of millions across the globe. Was Crowley's drawing a prophecy, a stunningly accurate glimpse into a future he could not possibly have understood? For decades after its publication in 1919, the portrait of Lam remained largely a curiosity, a piece of esoteric trivia known only to the small, insular world of occultists and the most dedicated students of Aleister Crowley. Crowley himself remained deliberately and frustratingly mysterious about Lam's true nature. He never gave a definitive explanation. The subtitle he gave the portrait, The Way. For a long time, the story stalled there, a mystery left unsolved. But the story takes a significantly darker turn in the hands of his most prominent and controversial successor. Kenneth Grant was Crowley's last protege, a young and ambitious English occultist who met the aged Magus in the final years of his life. After Crowley's death in 1947, Grant would go on to become a highly influential author and magical theorist. He would take the seeds Crowley had planted and cultivate them in a much darker garden. Grant did not see Lam as a mere symbol. He saw it as a living, breathing reality. He took the enigma that Crowley had left behind and constructed a new philosophy around it. It was a philosophy that would drag the Amalantrah Working out of the esoteric past and place it directly into the heart of the modern UFO phenomenon. It was Kenneth Grant who built the bridge connecting the magical world of Aleister Crowley directly to the mythology of extraterrestrial visitation and alien abduction. These were two completely separate worlds. The occult was seen as ancient and mystical, while UFOs were seen as technological and futuristic. Grant's revolutionary act was to declare that they were one and the same. He performed a dark and fascinating alchemy of ideas. He took Aleister Crowley's highly structured religion of Thelema, with its focus on achieving individual godhood through an act of will, and he fused it with the cosmic horror of H.P. Lovecraft. Grant argued that Lovecraft was in fact an unconscious channeler, a prophet who didn't even realize he was one. He pointed to Lovecraft's well-documented creative process of writing from intensely vivid and often terrifying nightmares. Grant suggested that these were not mere dreams, but clairvoyant glimpses into a real alien cosmology. Grant interpreted Lovecraft's cosmicism as an accurate depiction of reality, where humanity is an insignificant speck in a vast and incomprehensible universe. He combined Crowley's Thelema system with Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. The result was a magical system he called the Typhonian tradition. In contrast to the sunlit balanced paths of the Kabbalistic tree of life, which Crowley had mastered, this tradition would delve into the tree's shadow aspect. It would explore the dark, inverse pathways Crowley named the tunnels of Set, a spiritual dark web through which alien, non-human intelligences infiltrate our reality. In this new context, Grant stripped Lam of all its ambiguity. He explicitly identified it as a great old one. From Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, Lam was no longer a potential spirit guide or a symbol of enlightenment. It was now officially part of a pantheon of ancient, alien, godlike beings who exist in the cold spaces between dimensions, waiting patiently for the stars to be right so they can return and reclaim our world. A spirit guide is generally concerned with your welfare and development. A great old one is a force of nature as alien, and as uncaring as a black hole. You cannot reason with it. You cannot bargain with it. You can only be consumed by it. Grant then made the crucial connection. He explicitly described Lam as being directly recognizable in the growing number of accounts of UFO occupants, the so-called Greys. For him, Lam was not a spirit or a demon, but a living gateway to outside intelligences. The outside was Grant's term for the extra-dimensional voids, the Lovecraftian abysses that lie beyond our known world. It is from these formless, chaotic voids that these truly alien intelligences originate. In this context, Lam was no longer a passive vision that Crowley had captured in a drawing. It was an active agent with a purpose. Grant described it as a forward scout, an interdimensional emissary sent forth from these non-human intelligences into our sphere of reality. This implication is as clear as it is chilling. Lam's appearance in 1918 was not an accident or a random contact. It was a successful test. It was a sign that the veil of our reality had been successfully breached by a specific magical technique, creating a stable pathway for further and perhaps more significant incursions. The door that Aleister Crowley opened in that New York apartment was not just for communication. According to his successor, it was for infiltration. During the latter half of the 20th century, a growing global awareness began to emerge. It was as if Lam had been dormant for decades, waiting for the right cultural soil. Now it found that fertile ground and began to awaken, to sprout in the collective mind of humanity. The image itself begins life as Lam, an entity contacted through a magical ritual. Then, as the decades pass and the world changes, something profound happens. The world becomes obsessed with technology, and with the idea of visitors from other planets. In this new cultural landscape, land begins to surface again, but through a technological lens. The experience of contact is no longer a magical working. It is now a flying saucer. And the experience of contact is now an alien abduction or a traumatic event. The same face appears, but it is the mask of the extraterrestrial. The first major appearance of this archetype in the public record is tied to one of the most famous UFO cases in history, the Roswell incident of 1947. While the initial military press release from the Roswell Army Airfield famously announced the recovery of a flying disc, this was quickly retracted within 24 hours and replaced with the mundane cover story of a weather balloon. For 30 years, that was the end of the official story. It was only in the late 1970s that UFO researchers like Stanton Friedman began to investigate the case in depth, interviewing first-hand witnesses who claimed the official story was a massive cover-up. It was these later accounts, emerging a full generation after the event, that introduced the explosive narrative of recovered alien bodies. Witnesses like Glenn Dennis, a mortician in Roswell at the time, and the family of Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who handled the debris, came forward with stories that had been suppressed for decades. The descriptions of the bodies began to coalesce around a specific and unnervingly consistent morphology. They were humanoid, but not human. They were small, 4 to 5 feet tall, frail-looking, with disproportionately large heads, large dark eyes, and slit-like mouths. This was the birth of the gray alien, emerging from a contested memory of a desert crash. It was Lam, emerging from the wreckage of a supposed spaceship. The archetype was truly born into the public consciousness, however, with the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case of 1961. The Hills were a couple who were driving home through the White Mountains of New Hampshire late one night. They experienced a terrifyingly close sighting of a silent, rotating craft. This was followed by a period of several hours of missing time. They arrived home much later than they should have, with strange marks on their car and their memories hazy and fragmented. Plagued by severe anxiety, nightmares, and stress-related illnesses in the aftermath, they eventually sought therapy with a respected Boston psychiatrist. Under sessions of hypnotic regression, both Betty and Barney recounted a consistent and terrifying narrative of being taken aboard the craft against their will and subjected to intrusive medical-style examinations by non-human beings. Their descriptions of these beings were strikingly consistent with each other and with the emerging Roswell narrative. Barney's terror was palpable, even in the hypnotic trance, as he recalled their eyes. "Oh, those eyes," he exclaimed on the tapes, his voice filled with dread. "They're there in my brain." He felt they were communicating with him directly through those eyes, telepathically. The story, once it was leaked to the press and was published in a best-selling book, became the foundational template, the absolute bedrock for the thousands upon thousands of abduction accounts that would follow over the next several decades. The archetype reached its globally recognized, an iconic form with the publication of Whitley Strieber's 1987 blockbuster book, Communion. Strieber recounted his own abduction experiences from his cabin in upstate New York. The beings he called the visitors were not portrayed as simply curious or confused. They were powerful, mysterious, and deeply unsettling. And his description of the primary type of visitor was chillingly precise. He described them as small and slender, with a bald, grayish, pear-shaped head and 2 huge, prominent, mesmerizing black slanted eyes. The book's cover art became a cultural phenomenon. It was a haunting, artist-rendered portrait of one of the visitors, based on Strieber's descriptions. It was an update of Crowley's Lamb portrait from 70 years earlier. This face stared out from bookstore shelves and magazine covers across the world, burning the image of the gray alien into the collective mind of an entire generation. After Communion, the gray was no longer just an interest for UFO buffs. It was a global icon of the paranormal. How could Aleister Crowley have drawn the very face that would come to define the UFO phenomenon decades in the future? The explanation of mere coincidence, or of random chance, seems profoundly inadequate. It asks us to believe in a statistical miracle, an anomaly so great as to be meaningless. But the alternative is to seriously consider the possibility of a direct causal link. It is to accept the utterly paradigm-shattering possibility that the entities described by abductees in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s were of the same origin as the being contacted by Aleister Crowley and Roddy Minor in a New York apartment in 1918. We are forced to confront the disturbing possibility that the modern alien mythos did not begin with a crash in the New Mexico desert, but with a magical ritual in Greenwich Village that succeeded far beyond its creator's wildest and most ambitious imaginings. We have followed the threads through time, from a world at war to the dawn of the space age, from a secret ritual chamber to the public square of global culture. We have reached the moment of truth where we must directly confront the central enigma of the Amalantrah Working and its strange legacy. All the evidence has been presented. The unsettling timeline, a sequence of events that seems too neat to be accidental. The uncanny visual precedence of the lamb portrait, a drawing that appears to be a blueprint for a future nightmare. And the documented evolution of this archetype, from a secret esoteric symbol known only to a few, into a global cultural icon recognized by millions. All of these threads lead back to that one incense-filled room in New York City in the winter of 1918. The question, therefore, remains stark, unavoidable, and deeply challenging to our worldview. Crowley, wittingly or not, turned a key in a cosmic lock, and something or some things came through. This interpretation takes the timeline as its primary piece of evidence, arguing that the chronological precedence of Crowley's contact and drawing is simply too significant to be dismissed as a coincidence or a metaphor. It suggests a direct cause and effect. The ritual was performed, the door was opened, and shortly thereafter, the visitors began to arrive in their flying saucers. The climax of our investigation is not a simple answer that brings comfort and closure. It is a profound and deeply disturbing question that each of us standing at this crossroads must ultimately answer for ourselves. Our modern science, with its strict reliance on physical, repeatable, measurable data, lacks the tools and the philosophical framework to properly investigate a claim that by its very nature purports to transcend the physical world. It is like trying to measure a dream with a ruler or weigh an idea on a scale. The instruments are simply not designed for the task. However, to look at that evidence and simply dismiss it as mere coincidence would be an act of willful intellectual blindness. It would be to ignore a pattern that demands our attention. The creation and publication of the lamb portrait, an image that so uncannily and so precisely presented the gray alien archetype that wouldn't emerge until decades later. Crowley didn't just predict the future, he may have written the script for it. The door he opened in 1918 remains. For many who have studied this case, remains open, and an unclosed door allows for the passage of things, both seen and unseen, expected and unexpected. Whether that door leads to other physical dimensions filled with alien life, or to the darkest, most ancient depths of the human mind, it represents a crack in the facade of the world. It is a standing invitation to question the nature of reality itself, a challenge to the self-imposed limits of what we believe is possible, and a reminder that the universe may be far stranger and more responsive to our consciousness than we can comfortably imagine. The final lingering question, then, is not simply what came through that door in the past, but what continues to pass through it today, in our time, and how it is subtly shaping the world we are all trying to navigate. The ultimate challenge of this story is not to simply accept or reject one of the proposed solutions, but to dare to look through that unclosed door ourselves, to discard our certainties and our preconceptions, and to begin our own investigation, to find the truth that waits for us patiently and silently just beyond the veil. As we step back from the crossroads, remember the veil between the known and the unknown is thinner than you think. But the story doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. Because what we explore here is not just about the phenomena, but the journey that we are all on, searching for our meaning and purpose in life, seeking the knowledge and wisdom to solve the deeper mysteries in our universe, and to find and fulfill our destinies. Unexplained sightings, spirits, and science. They are all connected, and they have been interwoven into the grand tapestry of life. So remember, keep pulling at the threads, because this has been Crossroads of the Veil.